In the last part, we added all of our models and scaffolds to the app. This is going to extend the devise in particular to account for the new booking link field we added to our user model. And that's going to be important because we need to do some custom configuration to make every user's booking link a actual route that can be visited directly. So that way they can share their booking link to anyone and be able to book, have those other third-party people, I don't know what that means, but people out there book through that link and need to do so without signing in. So that's kind of the goal of the project. So in this case, I'm going to extend what my template already had by default. The devise docs will show you to kind of do something like this in your application controller as is. I've kind of just saved some time and already put that in my template. So all I want to do is essentially add the booking link field to each of these arrays. And we're doing that so we can update the account and also create an account, and each time pass our booking link as a property. So now if I were to add a field here, that should actually save. This is kind of whitelisting that stuff, so it's allowed to save to the database. And you have to pass those through in this kind of devise parameter sanitizer method. To make that legit, let's go into the devise folder. I'll go into sessions, or actually registrations, new, and edit. And then we could just go ahead and add that. So under, let's say, the email, I'll add a new field called booking link. And if you use my template at all, there are some few class helpers here. Feel free to ignore that if you're not using it. It's not a big deal. It just kind of extracts a lot of tailwind from the view. I'm going to just change this to a text field. And now we should have that display on sign up path. I'm on my edit path. So I'm signed in. So if you want to log out and go to sign up, that should be there now. Cool. And this, remember, needs to be unique. So if we were to save this and it already existed, it would send me some errors back to the form saying, hey, you can't do that. That booking link already exists. Choose another one. So we'll do the same in the update. So registrations, edit, and then I'll go back into my other account. Let's see. So John, was it John Doe? I think so. Yeah. All right. So if I go to edit account, we've got our booking link here. So at this point forward, I would have never gotten to this state since we've added that to the app. You can also enforce that and as like a required validation on the model. So you could say validates booking link presence true. I think I can never spell this right. Yeah. So now it's like, of course it's required now. So we'll go ahead and say Jace Doe. And then to update the password, you have to pass your current password. So now our account should have JDoe, like a booking link there by default. Cool. All right, so that's kind of ground zero for setting things up and getting it rolling. Let's go ahead and add our booking. If you go to booking types.new, we'll have an index here. This is part of my new scaffolding UI. It's nothing fancy, but it's just some tailwind to display a certain table. I'm going to override that and just tweak this quite a bit. So we'll go and honestly get rid of all that. Paste. Okay. And then on the new form, let's start with the form. We do have our tricks text editor here. It is working at the moment. So if you were to require or import this, right now I don't have it set up to be post CSS in this file, so that's something to consider. What I might do, all right, you know what I can do? I can just use asset pipeline. Let's do that. I'll just keep that the same right now. Instead of importing this, we'll keep it there and then go up to our config and manifest, and I'll say link action text .css. And then if you go back to the app, it might render differently, but I think all we need to do is now add it to the layout. Yeah, so this is a shortcut. Feel free to do it a little bit differently. And bigger apps, I kind of reach for post CSS instead of like the default Rails tailwind. I've done that in other guides, so I won't do it here because it's kind of a time suck. But Since I have our layout here is actually rendering the head as a partial. So I'll go to the shared folder, head, and then just above the application style sheet, I'll just render, or actually we could just do action text and another comma here. And that should render it in. And it'll say this. We just need to essentially say, well, I need to say link for one, and then I think it should work. So if we go to booking types dot new, there we go. So now that loads because the asset pipeline took over and compiled it down as a new style sheet in the UI. So that gives us, the starting point here. All right, so let's enhance this form a touch. Okay, there we go. And I'll actually have, well, let's call it like create a booking type instead of new. I'm going to add a link to like view the live page if you're the author of this. So we'll say Lex item center, justify between. I didn't spend a ton of time on design in this. It's not really crucial, I don't think. So apologies if it's kind of gross to look at. So we'll say if current user, which you need to be signed in to go to this path. We'll get to that point in a second. I make a method called booking link. Actually, that's just a Boolean, excuse me. So that's already part of the user model. We just added that. And then we'll say link to view lab page. And then we'll say user path. And I wanted to do this part first because I wanted to show you the custom routing we're going to end up adding. So I'm going to pass booking link as the parameter here. And then current user booking link. This is, and then class text gray 700 underline. So this should error out for it because we don't have that path yet. So what I'll do is go to our routing and walk you through that. Okay, so below our authenticated user bit, we can say, well, we didn't add everything. Well, we did do that. Okay, the scaffold did it for us. I'm going to move these down and keep them there. And below that, I'm going to have a GET request. And this is going to be assuming there's a unique booking link to user show as user. And that gives us that user path generic field. So that gives us this, if you look under the hood, this link is actually going to point right to the booking link because we've set this GET request up to point to the controller on the user, which we don't actually have. We need to add that. And you'd think this would conflict with devise, but it actually doesn't. So it's kind of a nice thing to have. There are certain instances that would conflict with devise. So if you were to do edit or new or anything like that, it would. So it's something to keep in mind. You'd need to like inherit from devise in some cases, but it is one thing where you can do like a show and still get away with it. So it's kind of nice for doing like profile pages or something. So users, controller, application controller, and then I'll have a show action on that. And this will actually be the like public facing URL that ends up being what you share out. So if you go to a certain URL, whatever you defined, that's going to be what people see, which is the nicety of it. So in this case, we're going to say we're going to get the user instance by going for finding a user, find by, since they're not signed in, we can't use current user here, but we can say booking link, which is passed through as a parameter, if you recall. So we'll say params booking link, and that gives us an access to it. So that's kind of a nice way to go about that. I need to actually spell correctly, create a booking type, and not capitalize that part. Cool. So now we can go to that page. It's going to just say, okay, you don't have a show view yet. So we just need to create a new folder there called users, since that's our controller name, and show for the file name. And on that, I might as well do that one quick. I'm going to render all the booking types for a particular user on this page. So in this case, we'll keep it simple to start. So max width 5XL, MX auto. I'm copying these down to save some time. Normally I'm not just like referring to tons of classes like this. So XL border gives us kind of a starting point. Okay, and then H1 will be the final, not the final, the main title of the page. So we'll say text 3XL font, use an extra bold, text center. And since we have an instance of user, we can say user.name, which is, just the shorthand way of getting the first name and last name back from that name of person gem, and say booking page. Okay, below that, I'll just say book your preferred time slot using the booking options below. All right, this should give us like some stuff to work with here. I'm trying to type fast and ruining the UI. Okay, now below that will be where we actually render the booking types. So I'll just do the groundwork real quick. So we'd render user.booking types, since we have that association. Each do booking type, loop through those, and I'll make a partial, so render pass an instance of booking type through. So there shouldn't be anything here yet, and since there isn't, it shouldn't error out, but we will need to add a booking type partial. It starts with the underscore. So in there we'll have some more stuff related to booking types, which I'll come back to when it makes more sense. All right, and honestly we could probably just like steal this one, sorta. I'll just wait though. All right, so the booking types, let's go back to that part now. We've got our main profile page set up. So this would be, essentially what you'd share with anyone. You could do it in like incognito, and it should still display. We don't have anything like requiring you to sign in. So that's kind of nice. Real quick, the layout I have, or it should be in navbar. This basic link, we could just link to the dashboard if we want to save ourselves some time. I like to go to this page in dashboard. Okay, it's just root path. I don't know why I made that so hard. Forgot it was the authenticated path. So let's go back and we can say root path there. Cool. All right, so booking types. And honestly, we're going to have this on the dashboard, so we don't need to have much there. The form will need to be there though. So let's go to our dashboard view and start adding the UI there. Booking types. We won't worry about index, but we will go to home dashboard, do most of the work there. All right, so this will have index auto, px4, pb32, kind of offset it. Okay, there's our dashboard intro. We're going to link to create a new booking type. Say new booking path. Class, I'm going to use my helper. I just have a button class helper in my application helper file. So if you go to application helper, at the bottom here, I've kind of just compiled a little helper with some themes based on whatever. If you want to change these to whatever else you can, I'm going to just maybe change this to sky, which is more like a Twitter blue. And the rest you could theme all you want. So these three methods at the bottom are what's responsible for like the main button class here. Just like a neater way to contain it all so your views aren't massive with Tailwind. So I'll just say primary class, that gives us this color here. Feel free to modify that if you're following along. Otherwise, feel free to do whatever. Okay, so I'll have py10 grid calls 3 gap 6. And I'm going to just render booking types as a shorthand. Rails is smart enough to know, okay, there's booking types. I'll render, oh, it's not on the actual, there's no booking types here. So let's add that now. Equals. This one's going to be current user, booking types. We'll come back and add more here. For now, we'll keep that as is. So that's going to essentially look for the booking types model, and in the views folder, we'll look in here and then find the partial that's the same name of the singular fashion. It's kind of an interesting convention you can get for free. Okay, so underneath that, we'll have a set of states basically. So we're going to have a bookings instance. So if there are any bookings, this current user can see those. Now in the Calendly world, you might have an actual calendar. I ran out of time, so I didn't end up doing that, but there is a nice gem called Simple Calendar out there by Chris at Go Rails. I think it was one of the first ones he made. I can't remember. At least I got some good traction, and that's helpful if you want to try that. It's wasn't super crucial to me to get that part done since it's mostly UI, but feel free to go add that and extend this. So we're going to have 3 sets of sections. One's going to be pending bookings, all based on that state that we've had in the beginning. And then we'll have kind of a table format. So table. That gives us like a starting point, and we don't have any instance of bookings in our controller yet, so let's add that now too. This is a little more advanced, so bookings equals, we need to find a booking where the booking ID, type ID I should say, is any amount of current user booking type IDs. So a neat thing when you say current user, you get the instance of user, okay, and you could say booking types, and you get a collection, which is like a collection of those associations. But you can also say booking types underscore IDs, and that gives you IDs, booking type IDs. There we go. And that will give you an array of numbers, so the numbers of those instances. So what's cool is you can use a where clause like this and pass multiple IDs through, and you get that collection back. So it's a nice little addition to the app here. We're getting an error because we have undefined method pending, and that's because we haven't set up our enum yet. So let's go do that before I continue, just to make sure those errors aren't persisting. So if you go to the booking type, or excuse me, the booking, and we'll go and add an enum to that. So right now we have this in our model, and what I want to do is say enum status, and then I'll pass a hash here. You can pass an array. I prefer this route because you can kind of move things around if you want, but it kind of gets hairy once you start doing that. So I would recommend making sure you're 100% set on what order you put these in, so you don't have to change them later. And it starts at 0, like programming does, you know. So we've got our status column, and we set up an enum relative to that. So underneath the hood, if you're not familiar, Rails adds a bunch of shorthand methods and a quick way to query for these. So that dot pending that you see is actually the shorthand way that gets added. So now that shouldn't error out anymore. So that's just kind of a quick scope that gets added simply by passing this in your model. So it's a nice addition. And you can see where it saves you a ton of time, because otherwise you'd have to go add the route that adds that scope, add a a query for the scope, make sure it doesn't like cross over any other boundary kind of thing. Gets a little confusing, and since that's so common, you can just use the enum and get a lot done at once. Great. So let's now render the rest of the view, then we'll copy these down for the different states just so we have that. So in the lower table body, we can render bookings.pending. So this is a nice way to do that too. It's going to go into our bookings and just render the booking partial, and it'll only scope those by any pending state, and that gives us a way to group these should you want to do something fancy with that grouping. So now, since we added 3 states for that, we can essentially just add 3 sections and just change pending here to, in this one, since this last will be unapproved, and then this one will be approved. And I'm calling approved like final, since that's going to be the ones that if there is a payment will actually go to approved state. Now I didn't think about that with just a generic booking, but that's quick and easy to add should we need to. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so let's go into our booking partial, and we can modify that to be a little more nice to look at. This won't really come into effect until create bookings, which you haven't done yet, but is something to consider. So on bookings, I'm going to keep the ID and the DOM ID attribute here, and we're going to have create a TR out of this since it's a table row instead of a div. And then the first TD will be a class. I'm going to actually have a little form in here that you can change the status on submit. So I'll show you how that works. It's kind of a nice thing I add to some admin level stuff once in a while. Slate 300, BG white, text left, P4. Okay, so in here I'm going to have a little handy form with model booking. Since we're passing this through, we've got that instance. I call it the method of patch. We get that for free since we already added the resources routes, and then we'll have a do block. And this will just pass a select field, form.select, and this is going to relate to the status of the booking. So a nice thing we can do here, since we're using the enum, is this helper called options for select, and then where it gets fancy is we can go into those enums by saying booking.statuses. Notice the naming convention there. It's status by default, but you can have the plural version of it. Then we'll map through those and display the key value pair. You can call that whatever. I think just key value makes a lot of sense. And then in an array, you kind of give the format you want it to display in the UI. So capitalize is one end, and then the key will be the other. So the key is what ends up going to the database as like what status should I set, and the key capitalized version is going to be what we see in the UI. Okay, so finally after this bracket, this mapping will set what will be the selected state. So in our case, we could say form object status. You could just say status, booking.status here too if you wanted. And then with select fields, you need to pass an empty set of brackets here. I've used this quite a few times. It's so confusing, but you'll finally get it once you get it. And then input underscore class. And then the secret to this one, which is kind of old school, is to use an on-change event handler. That's part part of kind of the HTML/JavaScript world. So we'll just say this.form.submit. There's probably something more modern and fancy you could use. You could probably do something with Turbo with this. I didn't do it in this particular case since it's such a small use case. But that gives us, you know, a way to change that status on the fly, essentially. All right, so I'll go through and add the rest of the fields real quick, and then we'll come back to the booking types and add that so we can actually create some bookings. So we'll have a booking name. Pretty much copy these down. There's quite a few. Email. Start at, and I'm going to just refer to my notes here. This is stuff you could look up to display times in a certain way. It's going to be %B, %E, comma, %Y at %L, colon, %M, and then the %P. And that needs to be in quotes. All right. So that's just a way of displaying date and time in a nice way. And you can either add that to like a shorthand method or just do it like I did right there. If you end up reusing that a lot, it probably makes sense to extract it to something else or somewhere else. And at, okay, and then let's see, booking type.name. So that'll say whatever you give the booking type's name. Then booking type payment required. And then this will either be like true or false, but you can do a Boolean or a ternary operator kind of thing where you could just say yes if it's required or no if it's not. Shorthand way to do that. And then finally, same with the customer paid. Don't forget that question mark. We'll say yes. Else will be colon no. All right. So nothing should happen here yet because we don't have any bookings. So let's go back to the booking types, and in the next video we'll get those displayed.